You know English, but you can't speak it. Not smoothly, not naturally, not without thinking. This book, Speak English Without Thinking, written and published by English Mindset Academy, is not about learning more English. It's about training your brain to use the English you already know. No translation, no overthinking, no hesitation, just real, natural speaking. If you're ready to stop thinking and start speaking, this book will show you how. Chapter 1. The Illusion of Knowing English. Most learners believe they already know English. They can recognize words, understand sentences when they read or listen, and even remember grammar rules when given time. On the surface, it feels like progress. It feels like they are close to fluency, but the moment they enter a real conversation, everything changes. Their thoughts slow down, their confidence disappears, and the English they knew suddenly feels distant and unreachable. This is not a lack of knowledge. It is a misunderstanding of what it truly means to know a language. Knowing English is not the ability to remember vocabulary or explain grammar. It is not about how many words you have memorized or how many lessons you have completed. Real knowledge of a language is measured by one thing: your ability to respond instantly, without effort, in real time. If your brain cannot do that, then what you have is not fluency. It is stored information. There is a hidden gap that most learners never see. It is the gap between understanding and using. You may understand a sentence when you hear it, but that does not mean you can produce it when you need it. You may recognize a word when you read it, but that does not mean it will come to your mind when you are speaking. This gap is where most learners get stuck, sometimes for years, without realizing why. The reason this happens is simple. You were trained to learn English as a subject, not as a skill. In school and in most courses, English is treated like something to study, analyze, and remember. You are taught rules first, then asked to apply them. You are encouraged to think carefully before you speak, to avoid mistakes, to be accurate. While this approach may help you pass tests, it creates a system in your brain that is too slow for real conversation. When you try to speak, your brain begins a long process. First, you think in your native language. Then you search for the English equivalent. After that, you try to build a correct sentence using grammar rules. Finally, you attempt to say it. By the time this process is complete, the moment to speak has already passed. Conversation has moved on, and you are left feeling behind. This is why you hesitate. This is why you freeze. Not because you are incapable, but because your brain is using the wrong system. Fluent speakers do not go through this process. They do not translate their thoughts step by step. They do not stop to remember rules before speaking. Instead, their brain connects ideas directly to English. The response comes automatically, without conscious effort. It feels natural because it is fast, and it is fast because it is trained. Speed is the missing element in your learning. Language is not just about correctness. It is about timing. In a real conversation, you do not have the luxury of thinking for 10 seconds before speaking. You must respond almost instantly. This is why even learners with strong grammar knowledge often struggle to communicate. Their knowledge exists, but it cannot move at the speed required for speaking. Another important truth is that fluency is not built through understanding alone. You can watch hundreds of videos, read books, and learn new words every day. But if your brain is not trained to produce language quickly, you will remain stuck. Input without output creates familiarity, not fluency. You may feel like you are improving, but when it comes to speaking, nothing changes. This illusion of progress is dangerous because it keeps you comfortable. You continue learning in the same way, hoping that one day everything will suddenly come together. But fluency does not appear by itself. It is built through a different kind of practice, one that focuses on use rather than knowledge, on reaction rather than analysis. To move forward, you must first accept a simple but powerful idea. Understanding English is not the same as speaking English. They are two different skills, and they require two different types of training. Once you see this clearly, your approach begins to change. You stop chasing more information and start building a system that works in real life. This is where your transformation begins, not by learning something new, but by seeing your current ability in a new way. You already have more English in your mind than you think. The problem is not how much you know. The problem is how your brain is using it. Chapter 2. Why translation is destroying your fluency. If there is one habit that silently controls your English, limits your confidence, and keeps you stuck no matter how much you study, it is translation. It feels natural, almost automatic, because it is the way you have always used language. You think in your native language, you search for English words, and then you try to convert your thoughts into sentences. This process feels logical, and for a long time, you may have believed that this is exactly how speaking a new language should work. But the truth is far more uncomfortable. Translation is not helping you speak English. It is the very thing preventing you from ever speaking it fluently. Every time you translate, you are forcing your brain to take a long and unnecessary path. Instead of connecting ideas directly to English, your mind creates a detour. First, it forms the idea in your native language. Then, it searches for equivalent words. Then, it checks grammar rules. Then, it organizes the sentence. Only after all of that does it allow you to speak. This process may take only a few seconds, but in conversation, even a second is too long. Real conversations do not wait for you. They move quickly, naturally, and continuously. While your brain is busy translating, the moment passes. The other person continues speaking, the topic changes, and you are left trying to catch up. This is why you feel slow, even though you know the words. This is why you hesitate, even when you understand everything around you. It is not a lack of knowledge. It is a delay caused by the system you are using. What makes this even more difficult is that translation gives you a false sense of control. When you translate, you feel safe because you are thinking carefully. You believe that you are being accurate. You believe that you are avoiding mistakes. But in reality, you are training your brain to depend on a process that will never work in real-time communication. You are strengthening the very habit that is holding you back. Fluent speakers do not translate, not because they are smarter, but because their brain has been trained differently. When they want to express an idea, it appears directly in English. There is no intermediate step. There is no internal conversion. The thought and the language are connected as one. This is why their speech feels natural and effortless. It is not that they never make mistakes. It is that they do not stop to think about them. You may wonder if it is possible to completely stop translating. At first, it may seem impossible because translation feels automatic. But what feels automatic is simply a habit that has been repeated many times. And, like any habit, it can be replaced. The goal is not to force yourself to stop thinking in your native language overnight. The goal is to slowly build a new pathway in your brain, where English becomes the first response, not the second. This change begins with awareness. You need to recognize when you are translating and understand how it is affecting your speaking. Notice the delay. Notice the tension. Notice how your sentences become more complicated than they need to be. Translation often pushes you to create perfect sentences instead of simple, clear ones. It makes you search for exact words instead of using the words you already know. This is why your speaking feels heavy and slow. The next step is to simplify. When you stop translating, you also stop trying to say everything perfectly. You begin to express ideas in a more direct and natural way. Instead of searching for complex vocabulary, You use simple words with confidence. Instead of building long sentences, you speak in clear, manageable parts. This is how real communication works. Fluency is not about complexity, it is about clarity and speed. Another important shift is learning to trust incomplete sentences. Translation makes you feel that every sentence must be fully formed and grammatically perfect before you speak. But in real conversations, people often speak in fragments, pauses, and simple structures. They adjust as they go. They do not wait for perfection. They prioritize communication over correctness. When you adopt this mindset, speaking becomes lighter and faster. It is also important to understand that translation affects not only your speed, but also your confidence. The more you depend on translation, the more pressure you feel to get everything right. This pressure creates anxiety, and anxiety blocks your ability to think clearly. You become afraid of making mistakes, so you speak less. And the less you speak, the less your brain gets trained. This creates a cycle that keeps you stuck. Breaking this cycle requires a different approach. Instead of focusing on accuracy, you focus on flow. Instead of stopping to correct yourself, you keep speaking. Instead of translating every idea, you allow your brain to find the closest expression it can. At first, it may feel uncomfortable. You may feel that your English is too simple or not perfect, but this is exactly how fluency begins. It starts with imperfect, natural communication, not perfect, delayed sentences. Over time, as you continue to practice this way, your brain begins to adapt. It starts to recognize patterns more quickly. It starts to connect ideas directly to English without needing your native language as a bridge. The delay becomes shorter, the hesitation becomes less noticeable, and slowly, speaking begins to feel more natural. This is the moment where many learners experience a shift. They realize that they do not need to translate every thought. They begin to trust their instinct. They respond faster. They feel more present in conversations. And most importantly, they stop feeling like they are using English and start feeling like they are simply speaking. The goal is not to eliminate your native language. It is to reduce its control over your English. You are not replacing one language with another. You are creating a new way for your brain to operate when English is needed. This new system is faster, simpler, and far more effective for real communication. When you let go of translation, you are not losing accuracy. You are gaining freedom. You are allowing your brain to move at the speed required for conversation. You are giving yourself permission to speak without fear, without delay, and without overthinking. And once that happens, something powerful begins to change. English is no longer something you convert. It becomes something you experience directly. Chapter 3. How your brain really learns language. If you truly want to speak English without thinking, you must first understand how your brain actually learns a language, not how schools teach it, not how textbooks explain it, but how your mind naturally builds the ability to communicate. Until you see this clearly, you will continue using methods that feel productive but never lead to real fluency. Your brain is not designed to learn language through rules. It is designed to learn through patterns, repetition, and meaningful use. This is not a theory. This is how every human being learns their first language. No one studies grammar before speaking. No one memorizes vocabulary lists before forming sentences. Language begins as sound, then becomes meaning, and only much later becomes structure. When a child learns a language, they are not thinking about correctness. They are focused on connection. They hear the same phrases again and again, in real situations, with real emotions. Their brain begins to recognize patterns, not consciously, but automatically. These patterns become shortcuts, and those shortcuts become fluency. Now compare this to how you learned English. You were introduced to rules before usage. You were asked to understand structure before experiencing language. You were trained to analyze before responding. This created a system in your brain that depends on thinking, checking, and correcting before speaking. It may help you understand the language, but it does not help you use it in real time. Your brain does not want rules. It wants familiarity. It wants repetition in context. It wants to see and hear the same patterns so many times that it no longer needs to think about them. This is what creates automatic response. This is what allows fluent speakers to talk without hesitation. They are not constructing sentences in the moment. They are recalling patterns their brain already knows. Every sentence you hear repeatedly becomes easier to produce. Every phrase you use again and again becomes faster. Over time, your brain stops treating these phrases as separate words and starts treating them as complete units. This is why fluent speakers often use common expressions naturally. They are not building them word by word. They are retrieving them as a whole. This is the system you need to build. Instead of focusing on individual words, you must start focusing on patterns. Instead of memorizing definitions, you must repeat real sentences. Instead of trying to understand everything, you must allow your brain to absorb and use language in context. This shift may feel unusual at first because it goes against everything you were taught, but it aligns perfectly with how your brain actually works. Another important truth is that your brain learns faster when there is emotion and relevance. When language is connected to real situations, your mind pays attention. It remembers more easily because it sees a purpose. This is why learning through real-life conversations is far more effective than studying isolated examples. Your brain is not just storing information, it is preparing for action. You may have noticed that sometimes you understand English perfectly when you are listening, but you struggle to speak. This happens because understanding is passive, while speaking is active. Passive exposure builds recognition. Active use builds fluency. If you only consume English without using it, your brain becomes good at recognizing patterns, but not at producing them. To develop real speaking ability, you must activate your knowledge. You must give your brain repeated opportunities to produce language, even if it is imperfect. Every time you speak, you strengthen the connection between thought and expression. Every time you repeat a phrase, you make it faster and more natural. This is how fluency is built, not in a single moment, but through consistent, focused practice. It is also important to understand that mistakes are not a sign of failure. They are a necessary part of the learning process. When your brain tries to produce language and gets it slightly wrong, it is still building patterns. Over time, with enough exposure and repetition, those patterns become more accurate. If you avoid speaking because you are afraid of mistakes, you stop this process completely. Your goal is not perfection. Your goal is progress. You are training your brain, not testing it. Training requires repetition, patience, and a willingness to be imperfect for a while. This is the stage where most learners give up because it feels uncomfortable. But this discomfort is a sign that your brain is adapting. It is moving away from the old system and building a new one. Consistency plays a crucial role here. Your brain changes through repeated exposure over time. Practicing once in a while is not enough. You need daily interaction with the language, even if it is for a short period. The key is not the number of hours, but the quality of your engagement. Focused, active practice is far more effective than long periods of passive study. Another shift you must make is trusting your instinct. As you build patterns, your brain begins to respond automatically. At first, you may doubt these responses because they feel too simple or too quick. You may feel the need to stop and check if they are correct. But this hesitation slows you down. You must learn to trust the process. Your brain is learning even when you are not consciously aware of it. Fluency is not created by thinking harder. It is created by reducing the need to think. When your brain has enough exposure and practice, it begins to operate on its own. This is when speaking feels natural. This is when you stop translating, stop analyzing, and simply communicate. The transformation you are looking for is not about adding more information. It is about changing how your brain interacts with the language. You are moving from a system based on rules to a system based on patterns, from a system based on thinking to a system based on reaction. And once this shift begins, everything becomes easier. Speaking becomes faster. Listening becomes clearer. Confidence grows naturally because your brain is no longer struggling to keep up. This is how language is truly learned. Not through force, but through familiarity. Not through pressure, but through practice. Not through perfection, but through repetition. And this is the foundation of everything that comes next. Chapter 4. The Thinking Shift. There is a moment in every learner's journey when everything they believed about language begins to change. It is not a moment caused by learning a new rule or discovering a new word. It is not something that comes from watching another lesson or completing another course. It is a shift that happens internally, quietly, almost invisibly, but once it begins, it transforms everything that follows. This moment is the realization that the real barrier is not English itself, but the way your brain is thinking. Until now, your entire system has been built on a simple sequence. You think in your native language, then you convert that thought into English, and finally you attempt to speak. This process feels natural because it is familiar. It is how you have always operated. Your native language is the center of your thinking, and English is something you add afterward. But this structure creates a constant delay, a gap between your thoughts and your words, a gap that prevents smooth and natural communication. To speak English without thinking, this structure must change completely. English cannot remain at the end of the process. It must move to the beginning. Your thoughts must start forming directly in English, even if they are simple, even if they are incomplete, even if they feel slow at first. This is the shift that changes everything. At first, this idea may seem unrealistic. You may feel that you do not have enough vocabulary, that your sentences are too basic, that your mind automatically returns to your native language. This is normal. Your brain is following the strongest habit it has built over years of repetition. Changing this habit does not happen instantly. It happens gradually, through consistent and intentional effort. The key is not to force complex thinking. The key is to simplify your thoughts. Your brain resists thinking in English because it tries to express ideas that are too detailed, too advanced, or too precise. When this happens, it immediately returns to your native language because that is where it feels more comfortable handling complexity. To overcome this, you must reduce the pressure. You must allow your brain to operate within a smaller, more manageable space. Start with simple, everyday thoughts. Instead of trying to express long and complicated ideas, focus on small, clear statements. Describe what you see. Describe what you feel. Describe what you are doing. These are the building blocks of thinking in English. They may seem basic, but they are powerful because they are immediate and accessible. They do not require translation. They do not require analysis. They exist in the present moment. As you begin this practice, you will notice something important. Your thoughts in English will feel slower than your thoughts in your native language. This is expected. Speed is not the goal at this stage. Clarity is. You are teaching your brain a new way to operate. You are creating a new pathway, and like any new skill, it requires time to develop. If you focus on speed too early, you will return to old habits. If you focus on clarity, speed will come naturally. Another challenge you may face is the feeling of incompleteness. When you think in your native language, your thoughts are detailed and precise. When you begin thinking in English, your thoughts may feel limited. You may not find the exact words you want. You may need to simplify your ideas. This is not a weakness. It is a necessary stage. You are not reducing your intelligence. You are adapting your expression to match your current ability. Fluent speakers do this all the time without realizing it. They do not always use the most complex words. They use the words that come quickly and naturally. They adjust their sentences based on the situation. They focus on communication, not perfection. This is the mindset you must develop. One of the most powerful exercises you can practice is silent thinking in English throughout your day. When you wake up, describe your actions in simple English. When you walk, observe your surroundings and express them in your mind. When you feel something, name it in English. This constant exposure trains your brain to associate everyday experiences with English directly, without translation. At first, you may need to pause and search for words. You may feel that your thoughts are slow and incomplete. But, with repetition, something begins to change. The pauses become shorter. The words come more easily. The sentences start to form without effort. This is the moment when your brain begins to adapt. Another important shift is learning to accept imperfection in your thinking. Many learners stop themselves from thinking in English because they are afraid of making mistakes, even in their own mind. They want their thoughts to be correct before they allow them to exist. This creates unnecessary pressure and blocks progress. Your thoughts do not need to be perfect. They need to be active. The more you allow your brain to think freely, the faster it will improve. It is also important to understand that thinking in English is not about replacing your native language completely. Your native language will always be part of you. The goal is not to eliminate it, but to create a separate system that activates when you need English. With practice, your brain learns to switch between systems naturally. When you are in an English environment, your mind begins to operate in English without conscious effort. This shift also changes how you experience conversations. Instead of preparing sentences in advance, you begin to respond in real time. Instead of translating ideas, you express them directly. This makes your communication more natural and more connected. You are no longer thinking about language. You are using it. Over time, this process leads to a deeper transformation. English stops feeling like something external, something you have to use carefully. It becomes part of your internal thinking system. It becomes a natural way for you to process information, express ideas, and interact with others. This is the turning point. This is where learners move from effort to flow. It does not happen suddenly, but it builds steadily. Every small thought in English, every simple sentence, every moment of awareness contributes to this change. You are not just learning a language. You are reshaping the way your brain operates. And once this shift becomes stable, speaking changes automatically. Words come faster. Sentences feel easier. Confidence grows without force. You are no longer fighting your mind. You are working with it. This is the true meaning of speaking without thinking. It is not the absence of thought. It is the alignment of thought and language. It is the moment when English is no longer a second step, but the first. And from this point forward, everything you build becomes stronger, faster, and more natural. Chapter 5. The Speaking System. Daily Training for Real Fluency. Understanding how your brain works is only the beginning. Awareness without action does not create change. You can clearly see that translation is slowing you down, that your brain needs patterns instead of rules, and that your thinking system must shift. But none of this will matter unless you build a daily structure that turns this understanding into automatic behavior. Fluency is not something you wait for. It is something you train deliberately, consistently, and correctly. Most learners believe that improvement comes from time. They think that if they spend enough hours watching videos, reading books, or studying grammar, fluency will eventually appear. But time alone does not create fluency. Direction creates fluency. You can spend years practicing the wrong way and remain at the same level, or you can spend a few months practicing correctly and experience a complete transformation. The difference is not effort, it is the system you follow. The system you need is not complicated, but it requires discipline. It is built on a simple principle. Your brain must practice using English in real time, every day, without depending on translation, and without stopping for perfection. This may sound straightforward, but it is very different from how you have been practicing until now. Most traditional learning methods focus on input, on receiving information, on understanding rules. This system focuses on output, on producing language, on building speed and automatic response. The first element of this system is daily speaking, even when you are alone. Many learners wait for the perfect situation to practice speaking. They wait for a partner, a class, or a conversation opportunity. When these opportunities are not available, they do nothing. This creates long gaps in practice, and the brain does not develop consistency. You must remove this dependency completely. Speaking is not something you do only with others. It is something you train by yourself first. When you speak alone, you remove pressure. There is no fear of judgment, no need to be perfect, no interruption. You can focus entirely on flow. You can describe your environment, explain your thoughts, or repeat simple daily situations. The goal is not to impress anyone. The goal is to train your brain to produce English continuously. At first, this may feel uncomfortable. You may struggle to find words, your sentences may be slow, and you may feel that what you are saying is too simple. This is normal. This is the beginning of real training. The second element is simplicity. One of the biggest mistakes learners make is trying to speak with complex sentences too early. They believe that using advanced vocabulary or long structures will make them sound more fluent. In reality, this slows them down and increases hesitation. Fluency is not built on complexity. It is built on speed and clarity. You must train your brain to use simple, strong sentences that come naturally. Once this becomes automatic, complexity can be added gradually. For example, instead of trying to say a perfect, detailed sentence, focus on expressing the idea in the simplest possible way. If you want to talk about your day, you do not need long explanations. You can start with basic statements and expand slowly. This allows your brain to stay in motion. The moment you stop to search for the perfect word, you break your flow. Your goal is to keep moving, even if your sentences are not perfect. The third element is repetition of real-life patterns. Your brain learns through repeated exposure to the same structures in meaningful contexts. Instead of memorizing isolated words, you should practice full sentences and common expressions that are used in daily life. These patterns become automatic with repetition. When you need them in conversation, they appear instantly without effort. Repetition does not mean mindless copying, it means active use. When you repeat a phrase, you should understand its meaning, feel its rhythm, and use it in slightly different situations. This creates flexibility. Your brain does not just memorize the phrase, it learns how to adapt it. Over time, these patterns connect and form a network of language that you can use freely. The fourth element is continuous flow. This is one of the most important aspects of fluency training. When you speak, your focus should be on maintaining movement, not on stopping to correct mistakes. Every time you pause to fix a sentence, you interrupt your brain's natural rhythm. You return to thinking, analyzing, and translating. This weakens the system you are trying to build. Instead, allow yourself to continue speaking even if you make mistakes. Your brain learns more from continuous practice than from perfect sentences. Mistakes are part of the process. They show that your brain is trying to operate in real time. Over time, with enough repetition and exposure, your accuracy will improve naturally. But if you stop every few seconds to correct yourself, you will never build the speed required for fluency. The fifth element is focused listening combined with speaking. Input is still important, but it must be used correctly. When you listen to English, do not just understand it passively. Pay attention to how sentences are formed, how ideas are expressed, and how speakers move from one thought to another. Then, try to use similar patterns in your own speaking. This creates a direct connection between input and output. Listening provides models. Speaking activates those models. When both are combined, your brain learns faster. You begin to notice patterns that you can use immediately. This is very different from traditional learning, where listening and speaking are often separate activities. In this system, they are connected. The sixth element is consistency over intensity. You do not need to practice for many hours in one day. What matters is that you practice every day. Short, focused sessions are more effective than long, irregular ones. Your brain adapts through repetition over time. Daily exposure keeps the system active and prevents regression. Even 10 or 15 minutes of real speaking practice each day can create significant change if done correctly. Consistency also builds confidence. When you practice daily, speaking becomes familiar. It becomes part of your routine. The fear begins to decrease because your brain recognizes the activity as normal. This is how confidence grows, not through thinking positively, but through repeated experience. The seventh element is mental presence. When you practice speaking, your attention must be fully engaged. If your mind is distracted, your brain does not learn effectively. Focus on what you are saying. Pay attention to your words, your flow, and your ideas. This level of awareness strengthens the connection between thought and language. Over time, as you follow this system, you will begin to notice changes. Your sentences will come faster. Your hesitation will decrease. You will rely less on translation. You will feel more comfortable expressing simple ideas. These changes may seem small at first, but they are significant. They show that your brain is adapting. As your practice continues, these small improvements combine to create a larger transformation. Speaking becomes smoother. Your thoughts begin to form directly in English. You start responding more naturally in conversations. The gap between understanding and speaking begins to close. It is important to remain patient during this process. Fluency is not achieved in a single moment. It is built gradually through consistent effort. There will be days when you feel progress and days when you feel stuck. This is normal. What matters is that you continue practicing. Your brain is learning even when you do not notice immediate results. Another important aspect is trusting the process. You may feel that your progress is slow, especially in the beginning. You may compare yourself to others and feel discouraged. But every learner's journey is different. Your focus should be on your own improvement, not on comparison. The system works if you follow it consistently. Eventually, you will reach a point where speaking no longer feels like a task. It becomes natural. You no longer think about every word. You no longer translate. You simply express your ideas. This is the result of daily training, not sudden change. The system you build today determines your fluency tomorrow. If you continue with old habits, your progress will remain limited. If you commit to this system, your brain will adapt and your speaking will improve. You do not need more information. You need more correct action. And that action begins now with your daily practice. Chapter 6. Breaking the fear loop. At some point in your journey, you will realize that your problem is no longer knowledge. and it is no longer even about method. You will see clearly that you understand enough English to communicate, that you have practiced patterns, that your thinking has started to shift, and yet, when the moment to speak arrives, something inside you still holds back. That something is not a lack of ability, it is fear. Fear in language learning is not loud. It does not always appear as panic or visible anxiety. Most of the time, it is quiet and subtle. It appears as hesitation, as a small pause before speaking, as a feeling that your sentence is not ready yet, as a voice in your mind telling you to wait just a little longer. That delay seems harmless, but it is powerful. It keeps you silent. It keeps you safe. And most importantly, it keeps you stuck. To understand how to break this fear, you must first understand how it is created. Fear is not something you are born with in this context. It is something your brain has learned through experience. Every time you avoided speaking because you were unsure, every time you stopped yourself because you wanted to be correct, every time you felt embarrassed after making a mistake, your brain recorded that experience. It began to associate speaking English with discomfort, with risk, with the possibility of failure. Your brain's primary goal is not fluency, it is protection. It wants to keep you safe from negative experiences. So when you enter a situation where you need to speak English, your brain reacts based on past patterns. It slows you down. It makes you overthink. It creates hesitation, not because it wants you to fail, but because it wants to prevent you from feeling uncomfortable again. This is the fear loop. You hesitate because you are afraid of making mistakes. Because you hesitate, you do not speak enough. Because you do not speak enough, you do not improve. Because you do not improve, your confidence stays low. And because your confidence is low, your fear becomes stronger. This cycle repeats again and again, often without you even realizing it. Breaking this loop requires a fundamental shift in how you see fear. You must stop treating it as a signal to stop and start seeing it as a signal to act. Fear does not mean you are not ready. It means you are entering a space where growth is possible. Every time you feel hesitation, you are standing at the edge of progress. The problem is that most learners wait for confidence before they act. They believe that once they feel ready, they will start speaking more freely. But confidence does not come before action. It comes from action. It is built through repeated experiences of doing something despite discomfort. When you speak, even with hesitation, you send a new message to your brain. You show it that speaking is not dangerous. You prove that mistakes are not as serious as they seem. You create new experiences that begin to replace the old ones. Over time, your brain updates its understanding. It no longer sees speaking as a threat. It begins to see it as normal. This process is not immediate. At first, the fear will still be there. You may still feel nervous. Your voice may shake. Your sentences may not come out smoothly. But the key is not to eliminate fear before speaking. The key is to speak while fear is present. Every time you do this, you weaken the fear loop. Another important step is changing your relationship with mistakes. For a long time, you may have believed that mistakes are something to avoid. You may have been corrected often, judged, or made to feel that errors are a sign of failure. This creates pressure. It makes you cautious. It makes you silent. But mistakes are not failures. They are evidence of learning. Every fluent speaker has made thousands of mistakes. The difference is that they did not stop because of them. They continued speaking, adjusting, and improving. They treated mistakes as part of the process, not as something to fear. When you change your perspective on mistakes, speaking becomes lighter. You no longer carry the weight of perfection. You allow yourself to express ideas freely, even if they are not perfect. This freedom is essential for building fluency. Without it, your brain remains locked in analysis mode. It is also important to create safe environments for practice. While real conversations can feel intimidating, you can begin in spaces where pressure is low. Speaking alone, practicing with supportive partners, or using guided exercises allows you to build confidence gradually. As your comfort increases, you can move into more challenging situations. Exposure plays a key role in this process. The more you expose yourself to speaking situations, the more familiar they become. What once felt uncomfortable begins to feel normal. This is how your brain adapts. It reduces fear not because the situation has changed, but because your experience with it has changed. There will be moments when you feel frustrated. You may feel that despite your efforts, fear still appears. This is part of the process. Fear does not disappear instantly. It fades gradually as your brain gathers new evidence. Each time you speak, you are adding to that evidence. Each time you continue despite hesitation, you are rewriting your internal response. It is also important to recognize that fear often comes from overthinking. When you focus too much on what might go wrong, your brain becomes overwhelmed. It starts analyzing every possible mistake before you even speak. This creates mental pressure and slows you down. To reduce this, you must shift your focus from outcome to action. Instead of thinking about how you will sound, focus on what you want to say. Instead of worrying about mistakes, focus on expressing your idea. This simple shift reduces pressure and allows your brain to operate more naturally. Breathing and physical awareness can also help. When you feel nervous, your body reacts. Your breathing changes, your muscles tense, and your voice may become less stable. By slowing your breathing and relaxing your body, you send a signal to your brain that the situation is safe. This helps reduce the intensity of fear and allows you to speak more comfortably. Over time, as you continue to practice, something important begins to change. The fear does not disappear completely, but it loses its power. It no longer controls your actions. You may still feel a slight hesitation, but it does not stop you. You speak anyway, and that is the true sign of progress. Confidence grows quietly. It does not appear suddenly. It builds through small experiences repeated many times. Each conversation, each sentence, each moment of speaking adds to it. Eventually, you reach a point where speaking feels natural, not because you are fearless, but because you are familiar. You have experienced the process enough times that your brain no longer sees it as a threat. It becomes part of your normal behavior. You stop thinking about fear, and you start focusing on communication. This is the moment where the fear loop is broken. You no longer hesitate because of uncertainty. You no longer avoid speaking because of mistakes. You move forward, even when things are not perfect. And in doing so, you create real progress. Fluency is not built in comfort. It is built at the edge of it. Every time you step into that space, you grow. Every time you speak despite hesitation, you move closer to natural communication. The goal is not to remove fear completely. The goal is to reduce its control over your actions. And once you achieve that, nothing can stop your progress, because you are no longer waiting to feel ready. You are already moving forward. Chapter 7. From thinking to automatic speaking, there comes a point in your journey where the struggle begins to change its shape. It does not disappear suddenly, and it does not transform into perfection overnight, but something inside you shifts in a way that is impossible to ignore. The hesitation that once controlled your speech becomes weaker. The constant need to translate begins to fade. The pressure to be perfect slowly loses its grip, and in its place, something new begins to form, something lighter, faster, and more natural. This is the transition from thinking to automatic speaking. For a long time, your experience with English has been defined by effort. Every sentence required attention. Every word required selection. Every response required preparation. Speaking felt like a task that demanded your full mental energy. It was not just communication, it was work. And because it was work, it was slow, exhausting, and often frustrating. But automatic speaking is different. Automatic speaking is not about speaking without awareness. It is about speaking without resistance. It is the state where your thoughts and your words move together, without delay, without conflict, without the need for constant control. It is the moment when English is no longer something you process step by step, but something that flows through you naturally. To understand this transformation, you must first recognize that automatic speaking is not a separate skill. It is the result of everything you have been building. It is the natural outcome of pattern recognition, repeated practice, reduced translation, and consistent exposure. It is not something you suddenly achieve. It is something that gradually emerges as your brain adapts. In the early stages, your brain relies heavily on conscious effort. You think about what you want to say, you search for words, you check grammar, and you construct sentences carefully. This is necessary at the beginning because your brain does not yet have enough patterns to operate automatically. It needs time to build them. As you continue practicing, especially through real speaking and pattern repetition, your brain begins to store these patterns more efficiently. It no longer sees them as separate pieces. It starts to recognize them as complete units. When you need them, they appear quickly, without the need for conscious construction. This is where speed begins to increase. At first, the difference may be small. You may notice that certain phrases come to your mind faster than before. You may respond more quickly in familiar situations. You may feel that speaking requires slightly less effort. These are early signs that your brain is moving toward automatic processing. As this process continues, the changes become more noticeable. Your sentences begin to form more naturally. You spend less time searching for words. You rely less on your native language. You start to respond instead of preparing. This shift is important because it changes your entire experience of speaking. Instead of feeling like you are performing a task, you begin to feel like you are participating in a conversation. Your attention moves away from yourself and toward the interaction. You listen more actively. You respond more naturally. You become part of the flow instead of standing outside it. This is what makes communication feel real. Automatic speaking also changes your relationship with mistakes. When you are thinking too much, mistakes feel heavy. They interrupt your process. They create doubt. But when your speaking becomes more automatic, mistakes lose their importance. They become small adjustments rather than major problems. You continue speaking without stopping. You correct naturally if needed, but you do not lose your flow. This is how fluent speakers operate. They are not perfect. They make mistakes, but they do not let those mistakes control their communication. Their priority is expression, not perfection. Their focus is on the message, not the form. Another important aspect of automatic speaking is trust. You must learn to trust your brain. After all the practice, all the repetition, and all the exposure, your brain has built patterns that it can use. But if you constantly interrupt yourself to check or correct, you prevent those patterns from working. You return to the old system of thinking and analyzing. Trust does not mean ignoring accuracy completely. It means allowing your natural response to come first and adjusting afterward if necessary. It means giving your brain the space to operate without constant control. This trust grows over time as you see that your responses are becoming more accurate and more natural. It is also important to understand that automatic speaking does not mean speaking fast all the time. Speed is not the only goal. Clarity, rhythm, and comfort are equally important. Sometimes, speaking slowly and clearly is more effective than speaking quickly. Automatic speaking gives you flexibility. It allows you to adjust your pace based on the situation without losing your flow. As you continue to develop this ability, you will notice that thinking in English becomes easier. Your thoughts begin to form directly in the language, without the need for translation. This is a powerful change because it removes the delay between thought and speech. Your ideas are ready to be expressed as soon as they appear. This also improves your listening. When your brain is no longer busy translating your own thoughts, it has more capacity to focus on understanding others. You become more present in conversations. You follow ideas more easily. You respond more appropriately. Communication becomes smoother and more natural. There is also an emotional shift that comes with automatic speaking. The anxiety that once accompanied speaking begins to fade. You feel more relaxed, more confident, more willing to engage. This confidence is not based on perfection, it is based on familiarity. You have experienced speaking enough times that it no longer feels new or threatening. This does not mean that challenges disappear completely. There will still be moments when you struggle to find words, especially in unfamiliar topics. There will still be situations that push you outside your comfort zone, but the difference is that you now have a system that works. You know how to respond. You know how to continue. You do not stop because of difficulty. This resilience is a key part of fluency. It allows you to keep moving forward, even when things are not perfect. At this stage, your focus should shift from learning to refining. You continue practicing, but your attention moves toward improving clarity, expanding your vocabulary naturally, and adapting your speaking to different contexts. You build on the foundation you have created. It is also important to maintain your habits. Automatic speaking is not something you achieve once and keep forever without effort. It requires continued use. The more you engage with the language, the stronger your patterns become. The less you use it, the weaker they become. Consistency remains important, even at higher levels. One of the most powerful realizations at this stage is that fluency is not a destination. It is a process. It is not something you reach and stop. It is something you continue to develop. There is always more to learn, more to express, more to refine. But the difference is that you are no longer struggling to speak. You are growing through speaking. This is the true transformation. You started with hesitation, with translation, with fear. You felt slow, uncertain, and disconnected from the language. But through understanding, practice, and persistence, you have changed the way your brain operates. You have built a system that allows you to communicate naturally. English is no longer something you know but cannot use. It is something you use without thinking. And that is the goal you were searching for. Not perfect English, not advanced vocabulary, not complex grammar, but real, effortless communication. As you move forward, remember that this ability was not given to you. You built it. You trained your brain step by step. You changed your habits. You faced discomfort. You continued despite challenges. This is what makes your fluency real and lasting. The journey does not end here, but the hardest part is behind you. You are no longer trying to become a speaker. You are already speaking. And from this point on, every conversation, every experience, every moment of practice will continue to strengthen what you have built. This is what it means to speak English without thinking. Not the absence of thought, but the absence of struggle. Not the removal of effort, but the removal of resistance. A state where language becomes natural, communication becomes easy, and your voice finally moves as freely as your thoughts. And once you reach this point, there is no going back. Because English is no longer something outside of you. It has become part of how you think, how you express, and how you connect with the world. You started this journey believing that English was difficult, that it required more words, more grammar, more time, but now you see the truth. It was never about how much you know. It was about how your brain uses what you know. You were not stuck because you were incapable. You were stuck because you were using the wrong system. And now, that system has changed. You no longer wait to translate every thought. You no longer freeze when it's time to speak. You no longer chase perfection before opening your mouth. You speak. Naturally, clearly, without thinking. This is not magic. This is training. This is what happens when your brain learns the right way. There will still be moments where you pause, moments where you search for words, moments where things are not perfect. But those moments will no longer stop you, because now you understand something powerful. Fluency is not perfection. It is flow, and flow is something you have built, step by step, word by word, day by day. So from this point forward, do not go back to old habits. Do not return to translation. Do not wait for the perfect moment to speak. That moment does not exist. The moment is now. Every conversation you have from here is not a test. It is an opportunity to strengthen your fluency, to express yourself freely, to connect without fear. You are no longer the learner who stays silent. You are the speaker who moves forward. And as you continue, something even more powerful will happen. English will stop feeling like a second language. It will become a part of you, a natural extension of your thoughts, a tool you use without effort, a voice that belongs to you. So, keep speaking, keep practicing, keep trusting the system you have built, because everything you need is already inside your mind. And now, you know how to use it.